Would you raise your right hand? In a room built for truth, the question lands like a hammer, not because it's unfamiliar, but because of who answers it. Yes, ma'am. Please state your full name. A pause, a breath. Jeffrey. Edward Epstein. My residence address is 6100 Red Hook Boulevard in the Virgin Islands. Even the address sounds like a warning. A private compound. A distant shoreline. A place designed to keep the world out and secrets in. Have you ever been convicted of a crime? Yes. That single word is the doorway to a story so sprawling, so grotesque. It refuses to stay buried, no matter how many years pass, no matter who tries to shut it down, and no matter how powerful the people are whose names orbit this scandal like satellites. Because what comes next isn't just a scandal. It's an infrastructure. It's a pipeline. It's a machine. And the files, those unsealed pages, those sworn statements, those long-fought court records are forcing the world to look again, not at rumors, not at whispers, but at testimony, at sworn words, given under penalty of perjury, describing a system that, according to survivors, ran for decades. And here's the part that unsettles people most. Epstein didn't just manipulate vulnerable girls. He allegedly learned how to manipulate power. The Epstein files. Who knew WHAT and when? Tonight, the question isn't only what did Epstein do, it's how did he keep doing it? For so long, so openly, with so many people around him, and why after his death does it still feel like the story isn't finished? When Epstein refused to answer questions, when he invoked the fifth, he wasn't just dodging lawyers. He was betting on something older than the law. Exhaustion. He believed silence could outlast outrage, and for a while it looked like he might be right when he died by suicide in 2019, while in custody. The criminal case against him ended instantly. No trial, no full public accounting, no final verdict that matched the scale of what victims described. Then came the conviction of his longtime associate, Ghislaine Maxwell, sentenced to 20 years after being found guilty on multiple counts related to sex trafficking. To outsiders, it looked like a closing chapter. To survivors, it looked like a stolen ending, because Epstein's death didn't erase the network they described. It didn't erase the people they said were in the rooms, on the planes, inside the mansions, at the dinners, on the island. And then, after years of legal fights, thousands of pages began to surface, documents tied largely to a civil defamation case brought by Virginia Giuffre against Maxwell. Not gossip, not a documentary script. Sworn statements, depositions, emails, names, locations, dates, a paper trail that, according to journalists who've covered the case for years, changes. The conversation from I heard to I swear. And that distinction matters, because allegations can be dismissed as noise, but sworn testimony is a different kind of weight. Epstein didn't just own property, he owned geography. New York, Palm Beach, New Mexico, the Virgin Islands. Connections in Paris, London, and beyond. Houses designed like fortresses, beautiful on the outside, sealed on the inside. And according to numerous victim accounts, he used that wealth to build a repeatable pattern. A girl is recruited with a promised money, a job, training, a chance to travel. The job is framed as something almost clinical, massage. But the massage, survivors say, was a doorway, a rehearsed routine, a script with a predictable ending. And once the abuse occurred, the machinery didn't stop. It expanded. Because the system didn't rely on one victim at a time, it allegedly relied on turning victims to recruiters using money, manipulation, fear, and shame to make the next introduction. A pyramid, a conveyor belt, a cycle, and in the center, a man who, by many accounts, did not behave like someone afraid of consequences. He behaved like someone protected from them. For many people, the name that forced Epstein's story into wider public focus was Virginia Giuffre. Her allegations didn't just point at Epstein, they reached into his circle, into his inner sanctum, into the kind of elite space where powerful men live insulated from the consequences faced by everyone else. Her accusations against Epstein. Maxwell and Prince Andrew captured global attention not because they were sensational, but because they were specific. They placed people in places. They described patterns. They connected dots. And when Virginia sued Maxwell for defamation in 2015, the legal process created a reservoir of sworn material. That's the backbone of many of the newly unsealed documents, statements gathered during that civil fight. Years later, those pages are resurfacing, bringing old questions back with new force. And when survivors return to these locations, like the Manhattan Mansion, the emotions aren't abstract, they're physical. Some describe it like walking into a room where time never moved on. A place where the walls hold the memories, and the scars are not always visible, but they're there. Maxwell's role: recruiting, grooming. Facilitating has been detailed extensively in court and at trial. But victims have also described something even darker. That she wasn't merely arranging abuse. They say she participated. They say she was present. They say she was an abuser herself. At Maxwell's criminal trial, multiple accounts painted a picture of an operation that required logistics, scheduling, controlling access, managing victims, maintaining Epstein's constant supply. The verdict against Maxwell did not answer every question, but it confirmed legally that the recruitment machine was real, and it raised a brutal implication. Epstein was the predator. Maxwell was often the bridge. The person who made the approach seemed safe. The person who made the trap looked like opportunity. Among the more controversial elements in the unsealed materials are references tied to Sarah Ransom. Alleged she had seen recordings involving a friend and prominent figures. Those figures have denied wrongdoing. The existence of such tapes has been disputed. The documents capture the allegation and the surrounding controversy, including changes and contradictions in past public claims. But whether the specific recordings exist or not, the broader idea keeps returning in this case like a shadow, that Epstein may have used recording, surveillance, information as leverage, that he wasn't only collecting victims, he may have been collecting dirt, and that possibility, even as an allegation, changes the psychology of everyone around him. Because if powerful people believed cameras existed, silence becomes strategic. Silence becomes self-preservation. Silence becomes the oxygen that keeps a network from collapsing. And in the wake of the document dump, the quiet from many named associates has been loud. Not necessarily because those people are accused of crimes, many are listed as potential witnesses. Not alleged perpetrators, but because the obvious question remains, if you were there, what did you see? And if you saw something that didn't make sense, what did you do? Long before Epstein became a household name, journalist Vicky Ward was assigned a seemingly straightforward task. Profile the mystery financier with the big fortune and the bigger question mark. Where did the money come from? Was he really? In elite New York circles, Epstein was a figure of rumoran, enigmatic connector with an unusual level of access, and the person who linked him to the social world. Maxwell. Ward's reporting, by her account, moved from curiosity to alarm when she encountered Maria Farmaran, artist who said she worked for Epstein in the mid-1990s and reported abuse to the FBI. Early as 1996, Maria Farmer's claims were a flashing red light. She described abuse, fear for her younger sister, and allegations that should have triggered immediate scrutiny. She said she felt dismissed, ignored, put in a drawer. And if her timeline is accurate, it means the system could have been disrupted decades earlier. Instead, according to her account, it wasn't then came. The moment that haunts the media side of this story, Ward says she collected allegations from the Farmer sisters and brought them forward in the reporting process. Only to have those details cut before publication, Ward has described intense pressure, intimidation, and Epstein's attempts to control the narrative. Vanity Fair's former editor Graydon Carter has disputed being influenced or intimidated. But what remains undeniable is this: a major opportunity to publicly expose the depth of the allegations. did not fully land in 2002, and the predator, survivors say, kept going. Palm Beach looks like paradise, manicured hedges, oceanfront wealth, no gated serenity. But survivors describe it as one of the most active sites of Epstein's alleged abuse. Courtney Wild's account is a brutal snapshot of how recruitment worked at ground level. She describes being a high-achieving kid in a poor community, drawn in by the promise of easy money, a massage, $200, and then, inside the mansion, the routine. It's upstairs, a hallway, a bedroom, instructions to undress. A moment where the reality flips and you realize the job was never a job. And the way survivors describe the aftermath isn't just trauma. It's contamination, feeling dirty, feeling like part of you is taken, feeling like you now carry a secret you didn't choose. Virginia Giuffre's account mirrors the same structure, except her recruiter, she says, was Maxwell. Maxwell allegedly approached her while she was working at Mar-a-Lago, noticing her massage textbook and presenting the offer like a dream: training, travel, a glamorous career, and then, within hours, it's the same trap, the same script, the same violence, allegedly at the hands of both Epstein and Maxwell. That's the detail many people can't get past. Survivors say the very first encounter wasn't a slow drift into exploitation. It was immediate, and it was coordinated. If there is a single hinge point in the Palm Beach chapter, it's the phone call. A stepmother reporting what her stepdaughter disclosed. Teens being paid for massages, then kept for other things. Police opened an investigation. What followed, according to accounts of the case, was the kind of evidence that should have ended Epstein's freedom permanently. Multiple victim interviews with reported ages in early teens. Descriptions of sexual acts, coercion, and patterns. Items found in the home that suggested premeditation and routine. It's not spontaneity. Documents and message pads that appeared to log arrangements, flight records, and manifests. Tied to Epstein's private plane. Famously nicknamed in the public imagination, investigators, journalists, and survivors have all returned to the same question. How does a case with that volume of alleged victims and evidence end in what many describe as a light sentence? In 2006, Epstein was arrested, but instead of life in prison, he served 13 months, with work release that allowed him to spend large portions of his days outside custody. And then there was the plea deal. One of the most criticized elements in this entire saga reported to include broad protections and to been handled in a way victims say excluded them from the process to survivors. It felt like the system didn't just fail, it negotiated, it accommodated, it looked away. Virginia Giuffre and others have alleged that Epstein's abuse wasn't confined to one mansion. It moved, it traveled, it expanded into an international trafficking operation. And this is where the story becomes less about one predator and more about a marketplace. Survivors have described being sent to powerful men politicians, professors, royalty, billionaires, framed not as individuals with choices, but as clients in a world where girls were treated like currency. That allegation is not only horrifying, it's structurally significant because if powerful people were involved, even as witnesses or associates, it raises questions about complicity, ignorance, and accountability. And the newly unsealed documents intensify those questions because they place certain names repeatedly in proximity to the locations where abuse was reported. To be clear, being named in documents does not automatically mean criminal wrongdoing. Many are cited as potential witnesses or associates. It's not accused perpetrators. But proximity still matters. Presence still matters. Silence still matters. Prince. Andrew remains one of the most prominent figures linked to the Epstein scandal. He has denied the allegations against him, but Giuffre's claims and a photo from 2001 showing Andrew with Giuffre and Maxwell in London became a defining public flashpoint. Andrew's 2019 BBC interview was widely criticized because his explanations appeared strained and because he made statements that were met with skepticism by the public in the unsealed documents Andrew's referenced repeatedly. And another woman, Johanna Schoberg, alleged that Andrew groped her, an accusation she gave under oath that matters because it suggests corroboration from someone other than Jeffrey. Increasing the pressure for scrutiny, Andrew ultimately settled a civil case with Jeffrey in 2022, reportedly involving a substantial payment, while continuing to deny wrongdoing. A settlement is not a legal finding of guilt, but it also doesn't erase the questions in the unsealed documents ensure. Those questions remain alive. When Epstein was arrested in 2019, it felt like the world finally caught up. He was charged with sex trafficking involving underage girls, facing decades in prison. For survivors who had spent years being ignored or minimized, the arrest was vindication, a moment where the machine finally stalled. But 1 month later, he was dead, and with him died the chance for a full criminal trial, one that could have put names, actions, and accountability into a single public record. Instead, justice fractured into pieces: civil cases, document dumps, investigations, media, reporting Maxwell's trial, and an open-ended question that keeps returning. Who else knew it? What did they do with what they knew? Maxwell's capture after a year in hiding was treated as a major win. Survivors openly celebrated, because to them, she wasn't a side character. She was, allegedly, a central engineer of the pipeline at trial. The lack of remorse described by observers stood out. After conviction, Maxwell appealed, and from prison, even with Maxwell behind bars, the scandal is not over. Because the case, as survivors describe it, was never only about two people. It was about a world that enabled them, a world that gave them cover, a world that let them move freely through elite spaces where questions weren't asked or weren't pursued. The headlines fixate on famous names, but journalists who have covered the case closely keep emphasizing something else: the scale. Over 150 publicly identified names linked in some way: associates, witnesses, people placed in locations, names that appear in testimony, and most of those names are not accused of criminal acts in the documents, but they are part of the map, and maps are powerful because they show patterns. Who was present? Who returned? Who stayed close? Who benefited from association? Who never asked why teenagers were in these spaces, or if they did ask, why they didn't push further. This is why survivors and investigators keep returning to accountability beyond a single villain, because if a predator can operate for decades, the question is never only how evil was he. It's how many systems failed at once. Law enforcement, legal institutions, social circles, media, gatekeepers, friends, business partners, people who might have seen enough to suspect something was wrong, and still let it pass. Epstein believed silence would protect him forever, in a sense. He built his entire operation around that belief. Shame silences victims, power silences witnesses, money silences consequences. But the documents keep surfacing, the testimony keeps landing, and the survivors keep speaking again and again, often at enormous personal cost. Some say they will never stop fighting. They will never be silenced, because the legacy of Epstein and Maxwell is not only the trauma they caused, it's the exposure of a darkness that thrived in plain sight, and the terrifying implication that even now there may be more names, more stories, more details that haven't yet reached the public record. The last line of this story has not. It's been written not because people don't want closure, but because closure requires truth, and truth requires the world to keep looking. Even when it's uncomfortable, even when the names are powerful, even when the monster is gone. So the question becomes, when the next file is unsealed, who will be in it and who will finally have to answer?